If you are already happy, gaining more money will probably make you happier. But if you're already kind of depressed, gaining more money is probably not going to help that much. There's a really interesting documentary about J. Paul Getty, who used to be the richest man in the world. And I think that the interview is taking place in the 1960s or 1970s in his castle in England. And it is a bona fide castle, like straight out of a fiction book. And he's sitting there in this like 700-foot long dining room surrounded by gold and diamonds, like the most ostentatious thing you can see. And the interviewer says, "Who are you envious of?" And the interviewer says, like, obviously everyone's envious of you. Who are you envious of? And the guy, he's so morose, he's so glum. And he just kind of looks down and he says, "People who are happier than me." And it was like, that's the case. Money didn't help him because he was already depressed. And in that situation, it's not going to do much. But I think if you are the kind of person who already has a chipper disposition, you're already happy, then gaining more money will probably improve your life. That I think is kind of an unfortunate irony of just like, because so many people who are depressed will think to themselves, if only I had money, it would fix everything. And it's probably not the case. There's a really great quote in Will Smith's biography where he says, when Will Smith was poor and depressed, he could say to himself, if only I had more money, everything would be better. And then when he was rich and depressed, he didn't have that hope anymore. Like money actually subtracted the hope from his life because he realized there's nothing else to strive for. And so I think that's the case. If you're already depressed, that's who you're going to be when you're rich. And this is just highlighting something that a million people have said and everyone already knows, is that money just accentuates who you are. If you're a jerk, it's going to make you more of a jerk. If you're happy, it's probably going to make you happier.
It's like power or alcohol or many drugs. It's an amplifier.
Exactly. One of the things that's really interesting to me, the new biography of Elon Musk, Walter Isaacson is interviewing Musk's first wife, whose name is Justine. And she met Elon in college before he was any successful. He was just an immigrant from South Africa. He didn't have any money, no success. That's when she met him. And she talks about how much money and fame changed him. It just completely altered his personality. The other thing that I've always found interesting is that if you go back and look at an interview of Donald Trump in the early 1980s, there are several of them you can find on YouTube, when he was known but not famous, and he was probably wealthy but not rich, you would not recognize him. Utterly different person. Very calm, very measured, very reasonable. And even if you are a huge Trump fan, I think you would be stunned at who the person is on camera. So any of us, me, you, anyone, if we became into that level of fame and power and money, it would change us. And there's another quote from J. Paul Getty where he says, nobody would be the same if they could afford to be different. And I think that's a sad quote, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. He says, nobody would be the same if they could afford to be different.
What do you think he meant by that?
I think he was probably mentioning in the sense of, does money make you happier? Does money change who you are? And I think all of us want to imagine that if you and I stumbled across $1 billion tomorrow, we would be the same people. We would have the same friends, the same interests, the same hobbies, the same disposition, the same personality. And I think there's enough examples of this where the answer is we would not.
Yeah.
There are probably some exceptions that we could think of, but I think every single person who comes into that kind of money is a different person, becomes a different person.
I wonder if they become a different person or if it's similar to the quote, I wish I could recall the attribution, but adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. I wonder if it's kind of like watching someone with money interact with a waiter or a waitress who's having a tough first day or a busy section. When people don't need to be nice anymore, how do they behave?
Yes, I think that's exactly it.
Whereas when you're still in building mode, on some level, especially if you're socially aware, you're playing, I shouldn't say all people, most people are going to play the game consciously or subconsciously, be on better behavior. But when you really have fuck you money,
right?
How often do you actually say fuck you, right? I think that's maybe a measure of what was a kernel of the personality or the hidden personality, the better hidden personality beforehand. Also, I don't want to end on basically, if you think your life sucks now, doesn't matter what money you make, you're probably going to still think your life sucks because it's pretty, now, even if it's true, it's sort of a sour note to end this chapter of the conversation on. So I want to explore it a little bit further. But what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I was in Omaha, Nebraska last week, obviously Warren Buffett's hometown. And I was driving along the freeway and there's a giant building, one of the tallest buildings in town, that on top of the building in enormous, probably 50-foot letters says, Buffett Cancer Research Center. So he's funded it. He's bought it. Warren drives past that building every day and sees that. And there's no way that seeing your name on something like that, there's no way that he's the same Warren Buffett who drove past that building when he was 13.
Yeah.
It's going to completely change just your view of who you are in the world. To your point about, let's not leave this on a sad note, because you're right. I do think money can be used to give yourself a better life. Mm-hmm. What the distinction we need to make is the distinction between happiness and contentment. Does money buy happiness? I think that answer is pretty firmly no. Can money buy contentment? I think that's a pretty firm yes. And that's great. Contentment is a great trait that makes your life better, but it's very different from happiness.
Could you just define that term so we understand what we're talking about?
I would say happiness is you wake up grinning ear to ear. Happiness is you're out at a bar with your friends. Happiness is you hear the funniest joke you've ever heard. And that's what I think people strive for. And they think that money's going to give to them, and it won't. But I think contentment is you just wake up with a low or virtually no level of anxiety. You're like, I'm good. I'm pretty satisfied with my career. I'm satisfied with my relationships. I'm satisfied with the house that I live in. That's not happiness, though. So I think money can reduce the number of sad days that you have, but it's probably not going to increase the number of happy days that you have. Now, that's awesome. Like, if you can do that, that's a huge life improvement, but it's not happiness.